The Fall of King Noel Baba. And it's kind of in the middle, so I'm going to read through what I have so far and bring this story to an end. The elves were frostbitten and so very afraid because it wasn't every day they tried to murder a king. I got a lot of killing stories going on right now, don't I? But on that bitter cold night at the top of the world, the elven rebellion was on the verge of collapse, like every effort to hold the Red King to account before it. Too much rode on the shoulders of three elves trying to change history in a single night. Sprig, Tyle, and Barton slogged through the snow in the dark patches between the stables and the toy shop. The flying beasts in their stalls just beyond the wall battered their horns against the sides of their enclosures. They seemed to sense that something was amiss. Not all the elves were in on it. Some of them liked the round master, but most were just afraid. Trying to slay an immortal was a fool's business. This was why mortals tended to fear their gods and call that terror love and respect. There were only so many of their kind that this freezing trio could count on once the violence was unleashed. Even then, this was an unlikely thing to succeed. Sprig shouted over the wind to the others, "You need to be ready. Once this starts, there will be no time for hesitation and no room for error." All right, that does not require a question mark. Are you talking to us or yourself? Tile shouted back. Sprig heard him, even if just barely, but with the driving snow and whistling winds, he thought maybe he could get away with pretending he didn't. Barton dropped to his hands and knees in the snow and started clearing the icy cover with his bare hands as his fingers went from olive to fish-belly white. "Help me find it and stop with all the idle chatter." Sprig's teeth chattered, but he stopped talking as he raked his fingers through the snow as well. Elves were used to the cold. That's what the king chose them. That's why. That's what I need to say. The king chose them as his slaves, but even they were not meant to be playing out here at night like children building a snowman in warmer climates. Tyle began a fit of coughing and did his best to muffle it into the fur of his collar. He returned to searching with the others. Then Sprig hooked one hidden link of metal in the ice. He pulled hard enough to lift a few links of the chain into view. "I got it." His voice was low and well below the cries of the wind, but his partner saw what he found and joined him in lifting the chain. As the metal thing uncovered, it pulled taut against the hook of the buried box. Now the real work began. They started by cutting out the perimeter of the hidden box. Sprig could not imagine anything surviving in that crypt, but whether he truly had faith anymore, this was still their only hope. Sprig started to clear the snow piled on top, but Barton pushed his hands aside and shouted close to Sprig's pointy ear beneath the edge of his cap, "Forget the top. We just need to clear the door and get this thing open." "Hurry," Tyle ordered. "Help me before the fat man discovers us." The service doors along the side of the toy shop behind them burst open as if the king had been summoned. Light spilled out across the snow cover that... I think snow cover would be one word in this case. Let's see. Nope. At least not according to the computer. Snow cover that never truly finished melting in any season. It was piled against the base of the doors, but the mighty ruler of his frozen kingdom forced them open hard enough to plow away two new snowbanks in one great motion. He stood over them, with his shadow cast across their treacherous business like the shade from a giant. He spread his arms between the open doors like a wizard casting his deadly dark magic upon his enemies. The other elves, still warm inside. Let me take out this still here because there's too many stills in the sentence. Bent over their workbenches, cowering away from the blowing winds and the anger of their eternal master. He let loose with his bellowing laugh that rose deep from his broad belly. It could almost sound like a jolly noise to those who did not truly know what he was capable of. And it was a strange noise, a ho instead of a ha. No one else laughed like that unless they were imitating the king himself. None of his elves ever dared to mock him the way so many humans did. "Did you bring me a present, my little elves?" His voice was laced with all sorts of threat. Sprig wanted to finish clearing the door to the hidden box, even though it was pointless now. The Red King saved them the trouble of deciding what to do next, or how to answer as he charged forward, kicking up slush with his heavy black boots. He showed his perfect white teeth as he unfurled his braided whip. He managed to lash the disobedient elves twice from 2 directions before they realized he had struck. Before they realized he had ever struck, let me say. All right. The elves still inside the shop cried out louder than the trio who dripped bright blood into the disturbed snow under their shoes. The others certainly did not want to watch more of their kind die like this. But that was exactly why the master left the doors open. He wanted them to see the price of this sort of foolishness one more time. They tried to scatter, climbing up out of the hole they had made in the cover where the metal box sat askew with its chain coiled like a frozen silver snake. They were not quick enough, though. The master stomped on Barton's back, pressing him down into the white until he disappeared under that black boot. The whip wrapped around Tyle's throat and jerked him backward off his feet in the air. He landed hard on top of the box with a hollow thump, clearing the snow off of it anyway. Something inside the crate stirred hard enough to shake the box from side to side. That distracted the king, and Sprig, not Spring. Gotta remember what I named my elves. Sprig hooked around the back through the master's tracks toward the open toy shop. The other elves did not seem to know what Sprig... Good Lord, I am going to misspell this all the way through. Did not know what Sprig had planned, but they scattered out of his path. Let's say the other elves inside. The other elves still inside. Did not seem to know what Sprig had planned, but they scattered out of his path, spilling unfinished toys and their tools off the tables and onto the floor in the flickering firelight. Is firelight one word? Well, yes, it is. All right, the master turned on him and covered the ground back to the shop faster than Sprig's smaller legs could carry him. They passed the threshold together, but the king slapped the fleeing elf off his feet and to his face on the hard work floor. Falling in the snow might have hurt less. Melting snow ran off the boots of the angry king, where the master usually insisted that everyone wipe their feet before entering his shop. He seemed not to notice as he scooped the elf up from the floor and proceeded to squeeze the little guy between his mitten-covered hands. Sprig twisted in the master's grasp and showed his teeth under a curled lip. The look of pain on the bad elf's face brought another belly laugh from the king. Sprig whipped around and sliced one rosy cheek with a carving tool he had managed to snag from the floor. As blood spilled ruby red over the king's leering lips, Sprig cut him again through the tender flesh under the man's nose. The king let out a girlish scream so unlike himself. He dropped Sprig and the elf managed to land on his feet. This moment might have changed everything that followed. The king clapped his hand to his bleeding face and moaned again. As he finally dropped his hand with a growl, he flung droplets of blood off his fingers to purl upon the floor in the melting puddles around his boots. What he saw were other elves rising from where they cowered under the workbenches. They too took up tools and brandished them as weapons as they gathered around Sprig. The master faltered just a bit and sniffed up blood in his ruined nose. He reached for his belt where he normally kept his whip, but it wasn't there. The master turned just in time to catch the painful braid across his belly as Tyle used the whip against the king. He surprised the elves by retreating out into the storm. They let out a rare war cry that their kind had not used. Okay, war cry is 2 words apparently. That their kind had not used in too many generations to remember. They followed, let's say they charged after him, intent upon taking him apart. They charged after him, intent upon taking him apart, and ignoring the cold. The king leapt over the exposed box in the snow and threw himself against the stable doors. Alright, I'm going to make that the same paragraph because I didn't really change anything all that much. We have him, Sprig cried. End him and free us all. The king threw open the doors, and the flying beasts took to the air. Snow melted in their thick fur as they circled overhead. Where they were still warm from the stables. Optimize my PC, not right now. I'm busy writing. They were still warm from the stables. The beasts finally dove and ended several elves bloody upon their antlers. Alright. The king laughed as the surviving elves scattered. He stopped laughing when he caught his own whip across his face, across his damaged face. On the backswing, the king seized the braid and pulled it from Tyle's grasp. Sprig came for him with the bloody carving tool in hand, but had to veer away as the beasts trampled through and over the elves still trying to fight. Barton and several others dove into the hole around the crate for cover. The king bellowed his own war cry snapped his whip, hitting elves and his flying beasts alike. Alright. Then the tide turned again. One beast cried out, and then, oh, let me make that 2 sentences. One beast cried out, and then another. Then one fell to the snow with its belly open and steam rising from its guts in the snow. Sorry for the goriness, everybody. More elves fell, but the flying beasts lost much of their momentum as their fellows were surrounded and brought down to die screaming wherever they landed. The king's fury faltered again, and he took to run. A few elves pursued, but Sprig held back, not trusting the old, let's say the ancient master. Let him flee into the snow as the elves secured the fortress for himself. But then, through the storm, he saw the cave the king approached. "Cover," Sprig cried. "Take cover. He's unleashing the great wretch." As the king pulled open the thunderous doors over the cave entrance, both the elves and the surviving beasts looked for anywhere to hide. "Come forth," the king's voice echoed. All right. Footsteps thundered. And then the white, furry giant let out a monstrous roar as it plunged out into the storm. Sprig ran for the toy shop, knowing he wouldn't make it. The great wretch snatched beasts from the sky and swallowed them whole. He took apart every elf in his path. And the king laughed at all the destruction. "Help us," Barton cried. Sprig turned his head, expecting... Let me scroll this up just a little. Sprig turned his head, expecting to see his old friend dying in agony. But it wasn't a cry of pain. Barton needed help with the original plan. Sprig detoured and dove into the hole with the elves still trying to clear the crate. Barton and Sprig unlatched the door and tried to pull it open. "Keep clearing the snow," Sprig ordered. Dial dove in with them and helped them pull at the crate's hatch. The great wretch must have spied the shiny metal in the snow, for it started charging toward them on all fours. The giant monster closed the distance quickly. "Pull," Sprig yelled, as if the other elves weren't already straining with all their might. All right. Then something inside the crate started pushing too. And the hatch burst open. The elves scattered as the terrors poured forth. Let me keep that same paragraph. All manner of misfits and abominations that the king had banished to an island now rose up at the place of their birth. The great wretch never hesitated, but it started to flail about as the rejected toys struck him in the air from all sides. They burnt into his fur and flesh with acids. They cut with their sharp edges that no toys were meant to have. And many of them started to eat the monster that had consumed so many others in his time. The beast, the wretch, continued to fight, but then the flying beasts and the elves joined in, and the great wretch finally fell for the last time as the misfits took him apart from the inside. The master of the monster looked for somewhere to flee. One more creature climbed out of the crate. This elf, this banished elf, was twisted and disfigured from all his years of exile. Twitchy, the elf's great hatred had only grown with time. Instead of waiting for help, Twitchy sprung from the crate and chased down the screaming king himself. He took many wounds, but would not, would not let up on his former master. Finally, Twitchy and the king both fell to the snow, heaving for breath. Sprig did not trust the twisted elf, but he ordered his brethren from the workshop to tend to Twitchy's wounds. What it meant to have the dark elf back in their midst would be a problem to deal with later. As the wretch gave out a final cry of pain, they attached ropes to each of the king's limbs, and the beasts pulled their old master in 4 different directions. His cries of pain had just begun as he came apart and painted the snow red. There would be no toys made by enslaved elves delivered that year or any year to come. The king had finally fallen, and the elves would rule themselves once more. All right.